Hey everyone, today we're going to talk to you about Florida's best springs. So we went to 13 springs when it was in the fall and winter, and we jumped into many of them during the winter when it was much too cold to be doing that.
Well, much too cold on Florida standards,
Yeah.
which is about 55 degrees.
I was really cold because it was 55 degrees outside and only like 60 degrees in most of the springs. But we're going to talk to you about the best Florida springs that we went to. But first, I think we need to start with what is a spring. So, Dylan?
A spring is when there's natural water pressure in the underground water that forces the water to come up to the surface. Usually this is like a small swimming hole type thing that feeds into a creek or river, into a main body of water. Sometimes it can be as big as like a lake, and we'll talk through some of the sizes of springs as we move forward.
Yeah. So there are some hot springs and some cold springs. I think Florida only has cold springs, but there are more than 600 springs in the state. Some of them are like established and private, some are public, and some are just things you can find and go explore on your own. So today we're going to talk about our favorite springs starting from our least favorite all the way to our favorite.
And disclaimer, we only went to a certain number. And so sometimes, we could have missed some. So let us know if there are any better ones that you think we should go to.
Yeah, put that in the comments.
Smash the like button. Start off with probably the most Disneyland version of a spring, which was Weeki Wachee. It's a spring that was founded a while ago, and they had mermaids who dressed up in a bathing suit but with their legs covered, breathe through tubes underwater and do shows kind of like you would see at any other amusement park. And so you can go to this spring, and there's only one section of it you can swim in, but the main spring section is roped off, and you pay to see a show where you go into underground, kind of into a theater. It's a big glass wall like you're in an aquarium, and then they do a whole show, and there's whole drama and everything.
Yeah. So I think it wasn't what Dylan and I were looking for because we wanted to swim. But if you were a kid or you're part of a family, you want to know where to take your kids, this might be a fun weekend trip with your kids. But for us, we were not that interested.
Yeah. I mean, in some capacities, if you liked, I think there was a water slide part of it.
Yeah.
So if you like the more established versions of parks, then this could be the one for you. But we kind of like searching out the more natural, swimming holes and cracks in the ground.
The next spring we're going to talk about is Homosassa Springs. So if I had to compare this to anything, it would be a zoo. They basically had different animals that they had rescued, or they were trying to help recover their population and things like that. Like they had hippos, they had a bunch of different birds, there were some owls, and then there was the spring that you could see that had a lot of manatees in it who were trying to huddle together, because manatees in the cold months, what they do is they try to get into warm pockets and just stay together.
Yeah, and one pretty cool exhibit they had here was they do a lot of manatee rehabilitation. So if any manatees get sick or injured out in the water, they can find them, take them out of the water, and put them into this basically manatee hospital. And so that you can kind of learn the steps about that there. And I don't personally like this, but there was a whole snake exhibit as well. I mean, it was nice to see through glass and not in the wild, but that was a pretty cool part of the exhibit too.
Yeah, but overall, we were still looking for places to swim, so that's why it's number 12 on our list. The next one we're going to talk about is Gilchrist Blue Springs. So we have this kind of low down on the list, but something that you should note is it's right down the street from Ginny Springs, which we'll talk about later. So if you're going to Ginny Springs, you might as well stop by Gilchrist Blue Springs.
This is a pretty good place to do kayaking if you like kayaking. You can enter the water. It's pretty shallow, probably knee to hip height for, I don't know, the size of a basketball court, a pretty long, pretty wide space, with the spring right there accessible, and then it goes to the river so you can kayak as much as you want.
Yeah, it was really pretty with a turquoise and then a dark blue where the spring was, but we just liked some other ones better. 10 is Alexander Springs, which is our first spring in Ocala National Forest. Ocala National Forest is a national forest in Florida, and you can go camping there. There's lots of trails, and there are a lot of springs. There's more than 3, but we went to 3. in Alexander Springs, we were kind of underwhelmed because it wasn't as pretty or as blue as the other ones. It was really large, kind of looked like a
Pond.
like a big pond. And it didn't have that pretty color that we had seen elsewhere.
Yeah, like a lot of springs, they had like a rock ledge that kind of was along the shore, and then a couple stairs down, and then it kind of just felt like a pond, and then the spring you could tell was somewhere like, I don't know, 40 yards in, but it didn't really feel worth it to swim. So
no, there is a lot of ground there, so if you wanted to have like a big group, it might be fun. But otherwise, it was okay.
Yeah. Number 9 is Ponce de Leon, which is the name of the founder of Florida.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Like the pioneer of Florida.
Yeah.
This place was actually pretty beautiful, although it was the first one we went to. So it was still pretty cold, and it was morning, and we weren't really feeling it. There wasn't anybody else swimming there, but this one was pretty cool because it had a lot of infrastructure, like a pool. But it was pretty wide, so you could have a lot of people there. So there was kind of like a rock ledge that went to like a rock seat almost underwater, and then a big pool in the middle, and there was some fish and things like that in there. It was nice, but we didn't end up swimming.
Yeah, it was a little too cold at 8 a.m. But I do think it was one of the prettiest ones we went to. Number 8 is Wakula Springs, and this was actually one of the first ones we went to. And we thought it was really cool. There was like a lot of grassy space, and then there was a jumping like platform where you could either dive or jump off of. But no one was swimming at the time because it was winter. So Dylan and I walked up to the high jump, and I was like, I'm gonna do it. But I had also just sprained my ankle like a month or 2 ago, and it was still pretty sensitive. So I kind of chickened out because I was like, I don't know, what if I hurt my ankle? So I went down to the bottom part and jumped in. But Wakula was really awesome. There's also a boat tour that goes there.
Yeah. It's pretty big too. It's like lake-sized, and so the platform jumping and the boat, like I guess mini marina, I don't know what you call it, where the boats dock, kind of gave you like cinematic summer camp vibes.
Yeah.
Where there's like a platform where kids can jump off and swim. There's some area for people to lay and sun, and then there's a little dock if people wanted to fish or go out on a boat. When we were leaving there were a big group of kids that came and started jumping in, and they were loud, and so we could see how it gets really popular during the summer, but it was a little cold for while we were there.
Yeah, kind of wish they had come earlier so I would have gone from the high jump. Also, there was a nice man there who told us that that particular springs is the width of a highway, which is kind of crazy. It's like one of the bigger ones.
Yeah, with a huge flow of water coming in.
We really liked Rainbow Springs, which is why it's number 7, kind of in the middle. But we liked how the spring itself kind of looked like a pool, but it had this gorgeous turquoise water, and there were tons of people just jumping in. Unfortunately, there wasn't that much space to hang out right next to the spring, but there was a large grassy area, like if you walked a few feet over, so large groups could hang out there.
Yeah, and the spring was pretty deep, so I think there wasn't really a lot of space in the spring where you could just stand and hang out. It's really mostly swimming or treading water the whole time, which gave it the like Olympic pool vibe.
Yeah.
But one thing that was really cool about this place is there were walking nature trails where they have man-made waterfalls, and the waterfalls are not like big gushing ones like you would imagine. They're like almost like the trickling smaller kind, but they're kind of all around you while you're walking around. And while it isn't the main part of the main spring, there are some like smaller springs around, so if you look while you're on the nature walk, it looks like there's really still water with bubbling sand, and so the sand is giving like a really bubbly, like boiling look,
like quicksand.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool to look at, and like cool nature experience that you don't normally see.
Number 6 is Itchitucknee Springs. This was also
Itchitucknee.
He's lame. So many dad jokes over here. This was a really cool one. I really enjoyed it. Dylan didn't go in, but I really enjoyed it because a nice man gave me his mask to wear so I could see underwater, and it was really cool seeing the spring in person. Like, it was so blue and crisp. And after that, we were like, we need to get our own masks. So we went immediately to Walmart after that and got masks to see more springs. But there's also a second. So there's one swimming hole, and then there's a second one, which we unfortunately didn't get to go to, but it's called the Blue Hole. And it's supposed to be amazing, like really deep. I think scuba divers even go in there. but we didn't have the time because it was closing.
Yeah, because that one you have to do like, I think like it's like 0.7 mile hike one way. It's not like a hike where you're going up and down. It's more of like a nature walk. But we got there a little late in the day and they closed that because they need to close it for time for people to go there and come back before the end of the day. So recommend going there early because I think that's probably one of the cooler spots at this. However, if you're just at the first part of the springs, then you can do the spring looking like Lita did, or you can kind of walk around and look at nature. One thing you should look for is snakes resting on branches, because they're sunning to get warm and they're kind of hidden, but you can see them. Luckily, that nice man pointed them out to us.
And luckily, Dylan didn't get too scared when he was going to see them.
I pointed from afar. Number 5 is Madison Blue Springs. This one was actually very gorgeous in terms of the like natural swimming hole spring, because you walk up to it and you can tell there's like a hole and there's some trees around it and some bigger rocks. And then when you get up close to it, there's actually like, I don't know, 10 or 12 steps down into it. And then it's pretty deep pretty quickly. And so it was really cold when we went, so there's not like a lot of space to swim unless you swim out into the river area. But the spring was really nice, really clear water, it was gorgeous, really refreshing and cool area. And if you're lucky, we got to spot some turtles swimming around,
which Dylan loved. I went in and was like really cold, but I still really enjoyed it because it was just so beautiful all around me. Something that's also cool is once upon a time it was named the #1 swimming hole in America by USA Today. So it definitely is a great spot. Moving on to number 4, which is Juniper Springs, and this was the second springs in Ocala National Forest that we went to. This was a beautiful pool-like spring. Like, it looked like a pool. It was circular and it had like steps into it, so like Dylan loves, good infrastructure. There were steps into the spring, and then there was also an area where you could get down to the spring. Well, I'm sorry, I couldn't get down to the spring. I tried multiple times. But if you wanted to really try, you could get down to the spring. And there was like some grass, and it was just beautiful and blue, and it was a great place, I think, to spend a day. Maybe bring your kids, maybe your family.
Yeah, and this one I put my feet in and went because they have those underwater benches around the edges too. So I didn't get in all the way, but one thing that is nice about this is if you're in your group or whoever you're going with doesn't have somebody that either wants to swim or can swim, or for whatever reason they can't go in the water, there is a nice place that you can walk up around to where you can look over a railing, and it's specifically not for jumping in the water, but you can look over the railing and see the springs, which you really can't do at a lot of other springs. A lot of other springs you have to swim into the water to see the spring itself. So this one is pretty unique for that reason. Yeah, we really enjoyed that one. Coming in at number 3 is Silver Glen Springs.
The bronze medal winner.
Even though their name is Silver. So the thing that's cool about this place is, again, it's another large area. The spring itself was pretty large, but then also there's a lot of grassy area. A family was playing like ultimate frisbee in one section, and other families like picnicking. And then an even cooler thing, if you're trying to look for like a more upbeat type of day, is I think it's Lake Travis.
We'll check that.
That there's a lake, like a big lake where boaters can go, that they can pull up to near the spring. There's a rope so they can't come into the spring, but so there's a big swimming area still. But everyone with their boats, and there's even like a party cafe drinks boat out there, are playing music and hanging out. And then there's like a second part of the park where people can picnic and party and stuff. So you can kind of go all the way from hanging with your family and a nice picnic and swimming in the spring to going over to the lakeside and partying with people in their boats. Yeah. It was a really, really cool.
It seemed like we went on a Saturday, so it was very lively, very fun, like definitely more party vibes, but also like fun picnic for family vibes. And the watercolor was gorgeous. We went in the water for a while because it was just this crystal clear, like light blue color.
Yeah, and one thing to mention about the springs, which Lita kind of hinted at earlier when she couldn't get down to one, is because of the nature of the springs pushing a lot of water up. sometimes it's hard to actually swim down to see the spring. Like, well, you can see the spring if you have goggles from the surface, but in order to swim down, get close and explore a little bit, sometimes it's kind of hard. And this one especially,
the pressure was strong.
You'd have to swim really, really hard to get down, and then if you stopped swimming, it would push you back up, and then start pushing you away from the center of where the spring was.
So you gotta have like a lot of force or something.
Yeah, you gotta have a lot of intent to get down there.
Yeah.
But it was pretty cool. We saw a bunch of fish, a bunch of people hanging out in pool floaties and just hanging near the edge and having, a good time.
A great time. Yeah, we loved it. So number 3. Number 2, also one of the most expensive ones we went to, but it's worth it. Ginny Springs. It's one of the most famous ones in Florida. It's actually a private property that has 6 springs on the property all along this one river. The property itself is so large. What we did and what you can do is you pay a little extra money. I think it was like 10 extra a person to camp overnight there, and you can choose whatever spot you want on the property and then spend the night. So we did that, and then we woke up and we were able to like go spring hopping basically.
Yeah, and I would definitely recommend, if you want to go with a bunch of friends, I would recommend going to this one because the campsite is privately owned. So, the normal like national park rules and things like that don't apply. Not that you can't be super wild, but people can like kind of have little parties at night.
Yeah.
We heard one group having like a huge party that sounded very fun. And then that was just the nighttime camping. And then they all woke up early and went either snorkeling in the springs or swimming in the springs or just hanging out. It's honestly a really, really fun place. If you're looking for something more fun and upbeat, I think it's really great. Yeah,
and the property has like volleyball courts. You can rent paddle boards, I think, from them. You can kayak there. And then there's a bunch of good scuba diving. So someone told us that like the caves go a mile back. So if you're a scuba diver, this might be one of the springs that you definitely want to go to.
Yeah, sounds a little scary to me, but you scuba dive down into the hole of the spring. And then there's just large cave systems that you can go in. So these scuba divers...
They're well trained.
We were a little confused because it's these little swimming holes off of a river that anyone like us can just jump in with a bathing suit and swim around in. But then there are these super high geared out people with even those little machines that kind of swim for you, super crazy cameras, crazy scuba gear, and not that much space. So then we started asking that guy, and that's when we learned that there are cave systems that people go into, which is kind of scary, but pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think we would definitely go back if we could get like a whole group of people to do it because it was a fun place.
Yeah.
Number 1! We finally made it. Number 1 is Three Sisters Springs.
This one was the best because it was different than all of the rest. This one was really the best because, I mean, you really can't compete because this one we got to swim with manatees.
We got to swim with manatees!
So the thing is, when you get there, we rented kayaks from this outfitting center, and you kayak through like swamp basically.
Well,
and
it's a river.
It's a river, but from where we rented, like it was kind of swampy, and then you turn and go under an underpass, which was kind of cool. And then you're in like a neighborhood development basically with their canals through them.
Yeah.
And then you meet up with the river, and the river is murky as most rivers are.
The river is Crystal River, so that's also the town name.
Yeah, and you can see manatees from your kayak there, and you can also get out and swim with manatees there, which is pretty cool. But the main part, I think, is when you go into the actual spring itself, which is the crystal clear water is beautiful.
Like
this
light
one was probably one of the
prettiest,
even without the manatees, one of the prettiest springs with white sand and some rocks and a few different areas you can swim in. And then luckily, if you go there around either early to mid-November, which is like the very last days that you can swim in there, or back when it opens back up, you might be able to see
late March.
You might be able to swim with manatees. So when we first got there, we didn't see any manatees, but we kayaked up the river.
And then we saw so many manatees while we were kayaking, like 40 manatees under us swimming back and forth, which was crazy.
Which is really crazy to see because they were going from cold waters up into the warm waters of the spring. And right before we decided to leave for the day, we said, let's check the spring one last time. So we go to the spring, and in the spring there was a manatee.
Yeah, there was one. So we got out. We're like, we have to swim. We got out, and then a second one came, and then a third one came.
Yeah.
And so we got really cool. We got to go really close to them. Obviously, we didn't touch them, but we were just like observing them really close and swimming with them. I mean, it was the most memorable experience.
Yeah, so I think definitely number one, because the spring itself would probably be in the top half regardless because of how beautiful it is. But then who can beat swimming with manatees? Who can beat swimming with
manatees? Now, if you want to go winter, so we went on November 14th, which is the last day of the year that you're allowed to go into the spring and swim with them. But if you go anytime between November and March, instead of swimming, they do have a boardwalk around the spring. And the reason they close off the spring is because hundreds of manatees come into the spring for the winter. So if you walk the boardwalk, you will see hundreds of manatees in the spring. And that's also pretty cool.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend doing that. I think next time that we're down in Florida, I think we should do that because it's not often you get to see that many manatees in one place. You can't swim with them then, but if you're close by enough where you can make a day trip out of it, it's definitely worth it.
So, definitely number one, and something we'll always remember.
Bingo, bongo, bango.
So this is our video all about Florida springs. I hope you go out and check them out and maybe swim in the summertime.
And let us know if you find any better springs or ones that we missed out that we should check out.
Yeah, put that in the comments below. And if you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel because we live in a van and we get on some cool adventures.